Welcome to another program of DFL Senior Roundtable. Today, I'm pleased to have with me our candidate for U.S. Representative in the 3rd Congressional District, Terri Bonoff. Welcome, Terri.
Thank you so much for having me, Bill.
And welcome to you as well, Bob.
Thank you.
Bob
Thank you.
Hines.
I'm a member of the Senior Caucus. That's
Yes, the DFL Senior
Yes, right.
Caucus is a wonderful organization.
It is
And one of
indeed.
the reasons we make this video recording is so that it reaches out to those who are homebound.
Well, thanks for doing that.
And we have known you, Terri, as a very successful state senator, uniting the middle, as you say on your campaign literature. You've done so much in the last few years, but now, how does it feel running for Congress?
Well, it feels like a great honor, Bill. You know, sometimes I'll be talking to folks or I'll be in parades and I'll say, "Hi, I'm Terri Bonoff. I'm running for United States Congress." And I am awestruck myself because I know what an honor it would be to truly represent the people of my community in the United States House of Representatives.
Good. And you've accomplished so much in your state Senate work. Would you tell us about that and how it might relate to your work in the Congress?
Well, thank you for that question. And just a little bit as an introduction, you know, I'm a 3rd generation, 3rd district resident. My grandparents lived out at Lake Minnetonka when I was growing up. My grandpa owned a chain of women's clothing stores. He started it in 1946 called Jackson Graves. And then my father, after being in the Army, he joined my grandfather, and I followed in their footsteps and joined the family business when I finished college. And so I ended up having a 20-year career in business. When I left the family business, I was at Tonka Toys, and later ended my career at Navarre Corporation, where I was the first woman vice president general manager of their largest division, the computer products division. But I stepped back from that work world to be home with 4 teenagers. And then when 3 of the 4 were going off to college, I ran for the state Senate. And I ran for the state Senate because I was determined to do something in the area of education, most importantly. I watched my own kids at the Hopkins High School, and I was part of the Hopkins High School Site Council, and they were debating which programs to cut because they didn't have the resources. And so I said, why are we always talking about cutting rather than talking about academic excellence? And so that's what first made me decide I wanted to go to the state Senate. I was honored to be elected, and it was the first time I had ever really been involved politically was when I ran for office, and I spent the next 11 years really working on the area of education, beginning with early childhood, where I co-authored the very first early childhood scholarships, and finishing an 11-year career in the Senate with work on higher ed and workforce development. And I'm sure in the course of this time, I'll share more about what we accomplished during that.
Good. What a great record you've built in the state Senate. And now I expect you're off to Washington to build a great record in the House of Representatives.
Well, thank you. So in particular, the thing I've been most proud of in my 11-year tenure has been the work in higher education and workforce development. So what we did when I first was chair of higher ed, we toured the state and we listened to students. We had these town hall meetings, and we would ask students, tell us about what are your obstacles, what are your dreams? And inevitably, somebody would grab a microphone and tear up about their despair around the student debt issue and their concern about how are they ever going to pay off that debt and what kind of job are they going to have. And so we said, we've got to do something about this. At the same time, we were listening to businesses say they had a skills gap. They couldn't hire workers for the jobs that they had open. So I thought, what a disconnect. You've got businesses needing to hire, and you have students who have debt and no sense of how to get a job. So we tackled it. And what we did is we looked at where is it working in the world, you know? Don't just look here, look everywhere. And we discovered that there were strong programs really in Europe where the norm was that a student, while they're going to college, would work for a company. The company would pay them, they'd get on-the-job training while they were getting either their 1-year degree, 2-year degree, or 4-year degree. And so we said, we can try that here. And we named this project the Pipeline Project, which stands for Private Investment, Public Education, Labor Industry Experience. But it's really all about the pipeline per se, because it's the pipeline of kids coming through high school, going through college, and then into the workforce. It was written up in Forbes magazine twice as being a real transformative model for how to approach educating the next generation. And so as I look at going to Congress, I would like to bring that approach to problem solving and really that idea itself to the national stage, because there's nothing more important as we look at this retiring generation. And here I'm with 2 esteemed seniors, but there's so many who are leaving the workforce. We have to have our arms around how to educate the next generation effectively.
Yes, I think even seniors are concerned about that.
Yes.
Helping our grandkids
Exactly.
get off to the right start in industry, and having a relationship with an industrial job or elsewhere in business, then at the same time earning getting the education they need.
Exactly.
That sounds a lot better than what we've had.
Yes, exactly. And so many kids in the upcoming generation don't have the support at home that many of our kids had. And so if we can let the industry and businesses fill that role and be the mentors on the ground and ensure that those kids make it through and complete college. When I was chair, we said we had 3 objectives. We wanted to reduce student debt, we wanted to increase college completion, and we wanted to prepare a 21st century workforce. And so we believe this approach really is not the only tool, but one very strong tool to accomplish all 3.
Great. Wow. And Terri, there are some issues that we both know are concerns of seniors.
Yes.
And are there any of those that you've worked on?
Well, I would like to talk about the concern around the solvency of Social Security and Medicare for the future, because that's what I hear about, is seniors have that uncertainty, and that's the last thing that you need to be worried about. And so, for example, the Paul Ryan budget suggests that we turn Medicare into a voucher program. And I would say that's not an acceptable solution, that we've made promises to our seniors. You've paid in your entire life, you've paid in. We need to keep our promises to those who have been the ones who have made this system work, and we need to solve our challenges a different way. And so I believe that we have to be much more innovative. So for example, right now, Social Security stops at $125,000. You're not taxed on the dollars you earn over that. Well, what if you...
Why not?
Well, that's a good question. I think it has to do with a formula of when it actually pays for itself. But what if we consider saying, okay, after 125, for a long range of incomes, you don't get taxed. But what if at $1 million you start taxing that income again? That's just one idea. There have to be other ways to solve this problem.
Yes. And I think you're going to be one that helps solve the problem.
Yeah, well, I will do my best.
You've been able to bring together people on both sides of the aisle in the Senate to get things done, and I bet you're going to be very capable of doing that in the Senate, in the House.
Well, thank you. Another concern we have with regard to the costs of Medicare and the costs of healthcare in general have to do with the fact that after the ACA was passed, Congress, instead of making sure that they fixed what didn't work about it, has repeatedly had their whole platform be about repealing the Affordable Care Act.
Oh, yes.
60 times or over 60 times.
Yes, so Congressman
they have voted to
Paulson
do that.
has voted 60 times to repeal it rather than doing common sense things and making common sense policy changes to fix it. So just one example, you see this whole scandal around the EpiPen situation. There's no reason that the House should not have passed a directive to tell the federal government to negotiate drug prices. We wouldn't be in this position if pharma hadn't carried the day, and instead we had said, you, federal government, negotiate drug prices, because it's in your best interest that we pay the least amount possible for prescription drugs. That's just one example. There's so many others.
Yeah, the pharmaceutical industry has managed to get that rule in
the Part D
Exactly.
Medicare
Right.
drug program.
So that
Right.
so the federal government couldn't negotiate the way every other country does.
Exactly. And so that can be changed. That can be changed by the lawmakers saying that's not acceptable, and we're going to direct action that's different than that. And so that's what I would be willing to do. I have a track record in the Minnesota Senate of standing up to my own party when I disagree with them. And I've done that successfully, actually several times. You know, when we brought in the alternative licensure program, because I believed one tool in the toolbox to close the achievement gap was to be able to allow alternatively licensed teachers, particularly bringing in teachers of color into our classrooms, would go a long way towards closing the achievement gap. And at the time, there were many entrenched interests who were opposed to that, including my own party. And so I worked strategically across the aisle and with the administration, and it took a couple years, but I didn't back down. And we did make that the law of the land, and it is making an impact. And so
Good for you.
I would be willing to take on anyone who says that we shouldn't do what's in the best interests of the people that I would be representing.
Let me ask you about drug importation.
Sure.
This is an issue that comes up periodically, and the question is, how do you feel? What do you think about, say, importing drugs from Canada for people where you can get lower priced
Yeah. So
pharmaceuticals?
I think that's for sure a start. That ought to be something that we can do. And I know Senator Klobuchar has spoken about that.
Correct.
I believe you've even worked on that.
Right.
Yes, so I strongly support that. But I would go one step farther and say, why should drugs in Canada be cheaper than here? And I would go back to it's because
Well,
we're
because
not.
they can negotiate.
Exactly. So it's not enough to say, oh, well,
Right.
let's use their good negotiating skills and take advantage of it. No, we should say, yeah, that's fine. We'll do that, but let's do it to actually put some pressure on our United States manufacturers
Right.
to drive the prices down. And we'll do that when we change the law, as I suggested.
Now, Bob, you're heading up an organization that has a strong interest in this. Would you tell us a little more about that?
Well, I'm with Mature Voices Minnesota, which grew out of the old Minnesota Senior Federation. And if you'll recall, they used to take the buses up to Canada to
Yeah.
buy the prescription drugs. Governor Dayton at that time would, participate in that program. But now there's a move to, actually import drugs from Canada, or
So
at
you
least
don't have to go up by
right.
bus.
So you don't have to go up there and do it. And the Canadians allow negotiation
Right.
for drug prices. We do here in this country for the Veterans Administration.
only
The
for the
VA,
VA.
yeah, the VA gets to negotiate prices for drugs, but for everybody else, you're at the mercy of the of big pharma.
Right.
And that's a concern. I mean, it's not just any drug, but for instance, insulin is going up in price. That's causing a lot of concern because that is a drug that people have to have, to live. And so it's a big question about how these drugs are going to be priced in the future and how you're going to deal with big pharma. And if you have noticed, big pharma has no problem with raising the prices to astronomical levels, above and beyond what people can afford, and that is a big concern.
It is.
And then you look at the amount of TV advertising on drugs, and really we get our drug advice from our physicians. And so you wonder about all that TV advertising and the cost that goes into that, that could instead be going into R&D or into lowering the prices.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Good. Oh, that's an important issue to many
Yes.
seniors. And some of the other important issues, you mentioned Medicare. Have you I think you may have something more to say on Social Security.
No, I was saying that we do have to tackle it, but we have to be willing to do so while still keeping our promises to those who've paid in.
Good.
Yes.
And now, there has been some advertising by your opponent that has been recognized that independent journals have fact-checked those ads and said it distorts Bonoff's words. The Paulson ad takes Bonoff's remarks out of context and very misleading. This ad gets a C- on the truth test. And this is being used against you to give people the impression that you're all for high taxes.
Yes. So when I first announced my candidacy, Congressman Paulson bought a website domain called Tax and Terri. And so this reminded me of several years back when a former colleague of mine, Terrell Clark, was running for the House of Representatives, and there was a similar effort. And so, number one, that seems to be a Republican playbook, is to take Taxon and associate it with a name, but it's a little bit demeaning to say, oh,
yeah.
Taxon Terrell, Taxon Terri, what's that about? In addition, so it's a little name calling, and I'm not so certain that that's respectful as or befitting of a congressman. But more importantly, let's just talk about the substance of it, because I have been earned a reputation in the Minnesota Senate as actually being very fiscally conservative. Time and time again, I have sided with the business community on tax policy because I believe that for our state to grow economically, that we have to have a competitive tax climate. So for example, when Governor Dayton was proposing the fourth tier, I publicly opposed that, and then I worked very hard to get rid of that B2B tax that we were successful to get rid of that. Yep, exactly. Yep. And then when the fourth tier was enacted, I introduced a bill with Representative Sarah Anderson that said, well, if you're a S Corp or LLC, you're exempt from that fourth tier, because I saw the effect that new tax had on our small business community. And now our small business community is actually paying a higher tax rate than our big corporations, and that's simply not right. And so I have been endorsed by the Minnesota Chamber, the Twin West Chamber, and I've earned the Guardian of Small Business Award by the NFIB each time I've run since my first election. So the last 3 elections. I wouldn't have earned those endorsements if I was the kind of, quote, Tax and Terri that Congressman Paulson tried to paint.
Yes, he's certainly distorting the record.
Yeah, so the other thing I'll say about that is there's a sentence saying that I turned a surplus into a deficit. And so while I like to take pride in being an effective legislator, I don't think I have the power to have caused the recession. And so
definitely not.
Not single-handedly.
I don't think so. So I think that was a silly thing to say.
Oh, it certainly is. And the legislature can't even propose a deficit budget, can they?
No, we have a constitutional obligation to balance the budget. That is certainly true.
So it's a ridiculous charge.
Yes, but what you bring up is really the effect of all of this advertising. And the interesting thing about this particular one is this actually was paid for by Congressman Paulson. So he decided that this was an effective smear against me and he'd pay for it, which I'm surprised, as I said, that a congressman would be willing to do that. It just reminded me that the thing about it that even most surprised me is we were in a debate, and I did talk about the one tax that I generally do support, and that is for transportation and infrastructure, and I think it's critical that we do that. And so I actually spoke about when the bridge collapsed and how that was a symbol of everything that's wrong with transportation, but it allowed us to come together and say for the first time we were going to, on a bipartisan basis, pass a transportation bill. And if you recall, even then, Governor Pawlenty vetoed it for political reasons, but 5 Republican lawmakers had the courage to override that veto, and that's how that bill got passed. And so I spoke about that is something I am proud to say I will invest in, and that was the clip that was taken out of context.
And
But more
those five
important-
were kicked out of the Republican Party, weren't they?
They were, yes, although some are back. So,
Well, one of them is now a DFLer.
yep, Ron Earhart is a Democrat, and Senator Abler is now back in the Senate. He was in the House at the time. I believe he was one of them.
Yeah.
Yes, but more importantly, I think the public hates this kind of advertising.
Oh, yes.
And I'm endorsed by End Citizens United because I'm going to take on campaign finance
Good.
laws. And I think there
Oh.
needs to be more transparency, and the public really wants to hear directly from the candidates.
Yes. Well, a number of us support End Citizens United, the bill, the decision of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right.
It has really invited all kinds of hidden money into the campaigns.
Yes, it has.
Very destructive. So we have just about 8.5 minutes left. What are some areas that you'd like to talk about, Terri?
Well, I surveyed the people in my community when I first ran. I have a wonderful email list of folks, and so I sent this out and I said, tell me what issues are most important to you as I prepare my platform and understand what issues I'd like to work on. And so I'd just like to share a few of those and
Please do.
why they're now part of my platform. Number one, I was surprised, but the number one issue that my community brought back to me was preventing gun violence.
Oh,
And
yes.
I think if you see all of the, tremendous pain that has been associated with gun violence, whether it's senseless killings of folks that we, believe to be innocent, or, police officers being shot in the line of duty. It's time after time after time. Stray bullets, taking a young child's life. These occurrences are all too frequent, and we can do something about it. Changing our gun laws won't make the problem disappear, but if it's an action that we can take in a positive direction, we must do that. And my opponent has voted over 20 times to block the most common sense gun violence prevention laws from coming forward. So for example, right now, if the FBI thinks that you could be a terrorist and they say because of that you can't fly, we still allow those very same people to have access to dangerous weapons. And
Ridiculous.
So, yes, you've heard this expression, no fly, no buy. That is common sense.
Yes.
Yes, and so that's an example
That
of...
takes an act by Congress.
Yes, exactly. And so Congressman Paulson has voted, as I said, over 20 times to not even allow that debate to come forward, forgetting the
He's
the
not
background
representing
checks.
this district.
Well, I think that the public does want our laws changed to prevent gun violence. So that's one example. Another thing is with regard to the environment. I mean, there is broad consensus that we have a crisis looming, that we must combat global climate change, and that if we don't slow the pace of the climate change, that we have severe times ahead of us, and that this is an economic security issue. We're talking about a shortage of water issue, that this is really something that must be tackled. And so again, Congressman Paulson's record is an overall 16% according to the League of Conservation Voters, and I've been endorsed by them for my willingness to tackle this issue, and I have tackled it in the Minnesota Senate, so I have a track record to back up my words.
Yes, you're so right that we need to tackle this at the congressional level too.
Yes, we really do.
Many other states are having far worse problems with their water than
I know.
we do here in Minnesota.
Right, but we have also heard claims that there's lead in our water, and so I think that we cannot have our head in the sand, that we all have to have an all-hands-on-deck approach, and we need to do from the regulatory side, we need to strengthen our regulatory agencies so that they can do their job and make sure the water we drink and our children drink is safe, and then from the future side and looking at the next generation, we need to slow the effects of climate change and begin to reverse this. In addition, I would bring up some issues that are of concern in our community. I think Congressman Paulson has been out of step with the values of the 3rd District in certain things. So for example, I was a co-author on the Freedom to Marry bill following the 3rd District resoundingly defeated the ban on gay marriage, and I was so proud of them. But after I was a co-author of the Freedom to Marry bill, Congressman Paulson got an award from the Family Council for his efforts to put that ban on gay marriage into the Constitution. And so these things, I bring them up because they are important things that people just should know about, and that if you look at what's happening in Indiana and in North Carolina, where actually the NCAA has pulled out because of discriminatory policies and practices being put into legislation and into law. You know, we don't want that in Congress. We don't want a Congress that would support that kind of change in direction. I don't think that's what the millennials are looking for. I don't think that that's where America stands. And so, you know, that's a case where the courts have even said that is not befitting of American policy today.
Yes, well, they're certainly right on that.
Yes, they
And,
are.
Congressman Paulson is really out of step.
It is just out of step, yes.
Yeah. Are there other issues that you'd like to talk about in the last 3.5 minutes?
Well, I want the people of our community to know that no matter what, I would put their interests first, and that I have a track record in the Minnesota Senate of working across the aisle. I was part of the Purple Caucus. I was actually one of the early members of the No Labels movement that was started from a person in our own community. Nate Garvis worked with folks in DC on the right and on the left to bring forward this organization that said it's time that we be loyal to the people and not to politics. And so my community is a centrist, moderate community. You know, they're pro-choice. They believe that everyone has equal rights, but they also think that we need to lead the way on with our economic policies. We need to do tax reform, immigration reform. All of these things are such critical, pressing issues to maintain the stature of our country on the global stage. And so it's my commitment to be that kind of lawmaker in Congress, to really listen to the people of my district, to share their values and their views, and then to work innovatively to have policies that drive our country forward.
Your commitments are certainly exciting me to realize we may be well represented in Congress if we can only help you get elected.
Well, thank you very much.
If we had more people in Congress with her attitude, knowledge, and ability, we wouldn't have too much to worry about, would we?
Right.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for joining me here today. Yes.
Well, we just have a minute more, and I'd like to give at least the address for people to contact you. That Terri Bonoff for Congress, P.O. Box 249. Was that in Minnesota?
Yes. Yep, absolutely.
55391.
55391, yeah. So thank you very much. And so he gave Bill gave the address for where to send a contribution. And you know what? Campaigns are expensive. And so that's very kind of you. You know, we have done a tremendous job raising funds for making sure our positive message is out and people can hear that, but I am up against an opponent with deep pockets, raised over $3.5 million, and so I welcome your support in any way possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terri. And thank you, Bob, also.
My pleasure.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you for tuning in.